From literally cutting off someone's manhood to having someone marinate in his own excrement, here are the 10 most dangerous prison punishments. Number 10. Castration. Let's start off this video with something that really hurts, at least for us men. Castration has been used as a punishment for prisoners for centuries. That's why it took me by surprise that this very cruel punishment has been used as recently as 2011. In fact, 85 people underwent surgical castration in the Czech Republic between the year 2000 and 2011. And they aren't the only country to have this punishment written in their laws. Indonesia's parliament in October 2016 had passed a law authorizing chemical castration following a number of high-profile cases of child sexual abuse in the country. The first man sentenced to chemical castration in 2019 said he would prefer an increase in prison time or even the death penalty. Ukraine's parliament in July 2019 had approved a measure to chemically castrate rapists forcibly. The legislation will potentially apply to individuals aged between 18 and 65 found guilty of raping or sexually abusing minors. Number 9. The Pear of Anguish. Think of a lump of cold metal being slowly forced into your anus. It's shaped like a pear with a bulbous head on one end and a narrower stem on the other. And attached to the stem is a screw. Your torturer is now ready to ask for information, a confession, or whatever it is he wants to get out of you. That, my friends, is called the Pear of Anguish. And you'll soon see why it was called such a name. You see, when the screw is turned, the head of the pear slowly opens up. The metal presses against the walls of your rectum. The pressure begins to build and it feels like the metal is going to rip through the delicate tissue. And in fact, it might. But that's not the goal of this device, because that would quickly lead to fatal bleeding. Instead, the pear is meant to stretch the anus as far as possible. As it stretches and rips the skin, it overloads the sensitive nerve endings and produces searing agony. Number 8. The Strappado. Compared to the Pear of Anguish, and in fact most medieval punishments, the Strappado is extremely simple. But that doesn't mean it's less effective at what it does. And what it does is to inflict as much pain as humanly possible. The Strappado's mechanism, as I've said, was quite simple. The hands of the victim were tied behind their back, and then the victim was hung using a pulley. This resulted in a very painful position in which the limbs could be dislocated and muscles and nerves damaged. And to inflict maximum pain and damage, weights will be hung on the victim's feet. This torture device from hell was ironically invented by the medieval church during the institution of Inquisition and was used on people that have been suspected of witchcraft. Number 7. The Scavenger's Daughter. The Scavenger's Daughter was invented by the Lieutenant of the Tower of London during the reign of King Henry VIII. Essentially, it was a series of iron rings hinged together in two parts. The prisoner was first forced into a kneeling position, as if praying, then told to compress themselves as tightly as possible. One of the rings was passed around the feet, then the torturer would kneel on the prisoner's back until the other ring could pass around the small of their back and eventually neck. Locked in this position for up to 90 minutes, blood would fill the lungs and eventually spurt violently from the ears, nostrils, and anus. This gruesome device was commonly used to make suspected criminals confess to their crimes. Quite predictably, even innocent people confess to all kinds of crimes just to avoid this cruel and unusual punishment. Number 6. Eaten alive by rats. Rats will pretty much eat anything and everything, dead or alive. We've heard of many tales of recently dead people, such as those of dying alone in their houses due to a heart attack, being eaten by these vermin. And of course, medieval prisons realized the rats' potential for inflicting prolonged pain to their prisoners prior to death. At the Tower of London during Elizabethan times, there was a cell called the Dungeon of Rats, which was located below the waterline of the River Thames. At high tide, the local rats would head into the cell to escape the rising water and take advantage of the free meal composed of injured and shackled prisoners. While the English were contented in letting the rats do their own thing, the Dutch were a bit more proactive when using rats as instruments of death and torture. Dutch leader Diederik Sonoy would bind his prisoners to a table, place a rat in a cage on top of them, and heat it up. The rat would desperately attempt to escape the searing heat by burrowing downwards through the prisoner's chest. Number 5. Death by 1,000 cuts. Known in China as Ling Chi, death by 1,000 cuts was an ancient form of punishing prisoners that was practiced well into the 20th century. In this form of execution, a victim was tied to a cross on a table, which also contained a basket of razor-sharp knives, each with a different part of the anatomy written upon it, which was covered with cloth. And much like a diabolical raffle, the executioner will draw one knife at random. He would read the knife's inscription and then slice the designated body part before randomly selecting another blade. If the prisoner was lucky, the executioner would draw the knife labeled heart, thus giving the prisoner a quick death. However, these executioners are tasked with keeping the prisoner alive as long as possible, thus they have near medical knowledge of the human body. This actually led to the prisoner's family bribing the executioner just to make sure he goes straight for the heart. In another form of this punishment, amputations of the extremities are done, not by axe or sword, but by tedious cutting using a small knife. Number 4. Waterboarding. Here's a medieval punishment that allegedly is still in use today. Waterboarding is a slight modification to the basic water torture where victims are repeatedly dunked underwater. Instead of drowning prisoners outright, it only simulates the sensation of drowning, and it does that with the use of a piece of cloth. The cloth is laid over the victim's face, who is inclined at an angle of 10 to 20 degrees. Water is then poured over the face to fill the mouth and nostrils, causing such distress that information is usually given up. In some cases, the victim is killed, but other severe injuries can include brain damage from oxygen deprivation, damage to lungs, and broken limbs from struggling against restraints. Number 3. The Brazen Bull. Created as a horrifying torture device to roast humans alive, the Brazen Bull was designed for the tyrant Phalaris by his sculptor Perillus. It is basically a bronze statue of a bull, which is hollow inside and equipped with various pipes and whistles. The idea is the prisoner will be thrown into the hollow cavity inside the bull and then locked inside. A fire will then be lit underneath the bull, heating its metal body enough to roast the prisoner alive. The pipes and whistles converted the screams of the damned to the snorts and growls of a bull, which absolutely delighted Phalaris. Absolutely horrible, I know, but here's a bit of good news. There really isn't any evidence that the Brazen Bull was created, much less used. There are only a few references about it in ancient literature. Primarily, Scaphismus, also known as the boats, was an ancient Persian technique of execution that is slow, painful, and if that wasn't enough, utterly humiliating. As described by the 12th century Byzantine chronicler Joannes Zonaras, the device is comprised of two boats joined together, one on top of the other. There are several holes cut into them that are positioned in such a way that only the prisoner's head, hands, and feet are visible from the outside. The prisoner is then placed inside, lying on his back, before the two boats are joined together with nails or bolts. Then the prisoner is force-fed a mixture of milk and honey, and the feeding continues until the prisoner is so full he vomits. Any leftover mixture is then smeared all over the prisoner's face, hands, and feet. He is then left out to bake in the hot sun, and because of the sweet mixture all over him, he attracts swarms of flies, bees, and wasps who constantly torment and sting him. This is already cruel enough, but the punishment doesn't end there. Because of his sickeningly sweet last meal, the prisoner now suffers from severe diarrhea and will expel liquid excrement. This becomes a breeding ground for worms that will eat the prisoner's flesh while he's still alive. What do you think is the worst prison punishment of all? Let us know down in the comments. Also, make sure to hit subscribe as well as the notification bell. That way, you'll get notified every time we upload new and amazing content just like this. Again, thanks for watching and see you on the next video.